Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Road to Hong Kong from 1962. And this concludes my series where I review all of the Road movies starring Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And this was the 7th entry in the Road movie or Road 2 movie series. It's the only one that has a "the" in front of it. They had come back after 10 years from Road to Bali in 1952, coming back with The Road to Hong Kong in 1962. And it was not a great idea to come back 10 years later. This is probably the worst Road movie. It definitely shows its age. You have Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, especially Bing Crosby, I think, just don't have the real energy to do the rapid fire jokes as much, and frankly the jokes just aren't really as funny, and they're suddenly not the cutting edge guys they used to be, and they weren't really the cutting edge comedy guys when they came back in 1952. Adding 10 years onto that, they definitely were not the cutting edge kind of comedy guys, and especially without Dorothy Lamour, makes this Road movie all sorts of a mess and kind of a misbegotten idea that they even thought this would probably work out. I mean, financially it did do pretty well. They didn't get their greatest reviews, although this is kind of a critic-proof movie. This was kind of the big franchise at the time. They didn't have as great chemistry with Joan Collins, who frankly didn't have as good of a part as anything Dorothy Lamour had when she was in her prime with Hope and Crosby, but still, it just really isn't as good as the films are in their prime, and it just isn't as fun, and it's really honestly not even that funny of a comedy. All the reviews are like, you'll still be laughing even though it's not as good, and I was like, really? Like, at what? Like, maybe the Peter Sellers cameo? But other than that, this is a pretty misbegotten reunion kind of a movie, which I kind of wish hadn't happened because it really taints the rest of the entire franchise. Road to Hong Kong is all told through flashback from Diane Joan Collins' character, explains to some American authorities what happened to Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, so she has this narration going on throughout it, which honestly isn't very good, and explains that Bob Hope and Bing Crosby start off in Calcutta doing a do-it-yourself interplanetary flight kit, and then Bob Hope's character of Chester hits his head and then ends up getting involved with this spy ring, and he ends up only being able to remember certain things, and they go to Tibet to find a cure for his memory loss, and then they get involved in all this stuff and go to space, and a bunch of crazy stuff, misbegotten things happen. It's kind of a mess of ideas, and that's really because this isn't parodying the adventure films that we're so used to with these road movies. It's parodying sci-fi and kind of spy movies, even though this came out like right before Dr. No, although most people credit this as being a James Bond-like parody, although it's kind of not. It's more like kind of big budget kind of sci-fi that was going on at the time, or kind of like explory stuff with special effects, and it doesn't really have as much fun because they're not really taking down a genre, they're kind of playing into it, which is kind of a problem with the later road movies, is they used to really satirize those genres but also were incredibly funny, and this film is neither. This is another of the road movies that 2/3 were paid for by Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and the other third by the studio. This was made with United Artists and was an English production, although I think they had shot in England before. This still was a financial hit and did well for them, and thankfully they didn't make another one. They did plan on doing a Road to the Fountain of Youth, which was going to be with Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and actually with Dorothy Lamour in that one, and even George Burns apparently, and Bing Crosby wanted it to be more like a Monty Python-esque script, which is like, I guess, but apparently Bing Crosby at least realized that they needed to update the comedy if they wanted to keep these going, something that I wish they'd realized before making this movie, but Bing Crosby died before production, so they didn't make it. And I think a lot of this is both misunderstanding what comedy was like at the time and also misunderstanding what would exactly work. These aren't the kind of things that you can just kind of have parody whatever the fuck you want. They're kind of parodying certain particular things, which were adventure films, and you could probably find some kind of adventure films. I think it was an awkward time to do a parody. It's right when James Bond was going to come in and kind of reinvent things in the 60s, so clearly like that would have been a better period. Maybe in a weird way if they waited to parody James Bond stuff in a more direct way, that might have worked a little better, but unfortunately they didn't. But then, you know, Casino Royale would, the 60s movie of course, and then Austin and powers, but if they had done it, I think that would have worked a lot better. Road to Hong Kong also, it involves Hong Kong, but it also doesn't really involve its location. It's trying to do this space thing. I don't know why it wasn't called The Road to Space. To me, that would make a lot more sense, but it's like kind of the road to Hong Kong and space, and Calcutta's in there too or something. That's a little weird plot-wise. And even when I was watching the trailer on the DVD, I was like, so this is the road to Hong Kong, but you're really selling the space element. I'm sure people were very confused, but they kind of just went with it. But it didn't seem like the aura around this movie was like they went with it where they really wanted another road movie, and that's probably why it took them forever to even develop one, and then Bing Crosby died. The biggest controversy about this is that Dorothy Lamour really isn't in it, which I think was a huge mistake, because probably the best parts of this movie, other than Peter Sellers' cameo, was Dorothy Lamour's little cameo. Apparently, Bing Crosby thought that she was too old. Bob Hope did campaign to get her in it, and Dorothy Lamour didn't even find out about this movie until she heard in the newspaper that it was being made, and then contacted the producers. It was originally going to be a smaller cameo, and she balked at that idea. She was like, I'm not doing that. And then they had a bigger cameo because the money was going to fall out if they didn't, probably because most people realized having a road movie without her was probably a disastrous idea. And now she's in the trailer in big letters, and even on the poster that she's in this, just to be like, no, she's in it too, don't worry. Even though she's not really in it that much, but those parts I felt the chemistry I felt throughout the other road movies. It felt like a road movie I'd seen before, and I actually like that. But without her in it, it really did feel like it was something was missing. Not that that scene was amazing, it just felt like a cute little reunion thing, which I don't think this movie felt enough of. It felt like something was sincerely lacking. And I don't think Joan Collins, not to like young shame her or something, or get mad at her because she was cast in this, I don't think they really casted the female lead based on someone who would work with their chemistry. Someone like Dorothy Lamour. Dorothy Lamour didn't make these movies work by being beautiful. I mean, certainly she was, but she got these movies to work because she got to play with their chemistry, that she understood how to work with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, which those two already have natural chemistry together. But what made Road to Morocco and all the other road movies really work is watching her work within that chemistry. And Joan Collins, it doesn't really work as well, and they were trying to cast like Brigitte Bardot and Sophia Loren and just like women who were beautiful. Why don't you find someone like Mary Tyler Moore's kind of right era, or someone like that who's like beautiful but funny, who could have worked within their comedic stylings and get it to work? But they weren't thinking about that. They were just thinking of having a gorgeous woman with them. Apparently the various actors they did ask didn't accept, which I think it was a smart move for them, frankly, because this probably smelled like a turkey or just a forgettable cash grab, which is kind of what it ended up being. It was directed by Norman Panama and Melvin Frank, who were Bob Hope and Bing Crosby's managers at one point. I wish they had really gotten screenwriters or directors from the previous ones. It does feel like that reunion thing where they kind of get a lot of people behind the scenes who didn't make the original thing special, but get a few people and think it's kind of gonna work out. You're kind of forgetting like there was more to it than just these two key elements, and this just kind of reeks of that. If you look at the recent like X-Files thing, they just had Chris Carter, but they didn't have as much of the writing staff as they used to, and so it kind of suffered for it. And same with The Road to Hong Kong. They also had more celebrity cameos in this than any other road movie. The last two seem to suffer from that quite a bit. You have Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin making his second cameo in a road movie. You also have Peter Sellers and Zsa Zsa Gabor, but Peter Sellers really got the best reviews out of this whole movie, which is funny because he's not really in it. He does this Indian doctor thing, which I'm sure nowadays would be considered offensive. Oddly that this came out in 62, but I feel like this was honestly probably the most culturally offensive of the road movies, before they're really parodying the idea and kind of the image that a lot of these films are portraying of these various minorities and are making themselves the goofs. And in this, a lot of times they're doing like Asian accents and things like that. It's just like not really working, and it's not very funny, and it's just super racist and shit. But Peter Sellers, regardless of the Indian doctor, which he did in other movies, he's actually really funny, and he even kind of gets into like kind of the mood and the energy that Bing Crosby and Bob Hope used to be able to bring to these films. I'm not saying this trying to be ageist and like discriminate against old people. I'm just saying like there's a certain point where, you know, you might be too young for something, you might be too old for something. Those are just kind of what the roles require and what a kind of movie requires. And you could play with that idea, but they're not. They're trying to act like they're still in their like 30s and 40s, and the ship has sailed, frankly. And they didn't really kind of adjust the movie to work within that, and it just suffered for it. That's the problem with The Road to Hong Kong. This is really a fans only kind of movie because there's just nothing really to add to it. I wish they had kind of gotten more wackier with it. It's certainly the period like the early 60s, you think of something like Tom Jones or something like that, I feel like could have really worked for them under the right direction. Maybe if they had waited a little later for like crazier 60s to really come into full swing or something. I mean, obviously they wouldn't have known, so maybe that's stupid, but but I do feel like there could have been a good road movie in the 60s, like kind of the arrow could have been right for them if they had the right direction. This kind of falls under the problem with them doing the 2/3 deal, although Road to Rio was very funny, I will say, but the other, like Road to Bali, and this one feels like there's a lot of money, there's a lot of safety nets there. It doesn't feel as challenging, it doesn't feel as unexpected, and that's not because you got used to that, it's because it just really doesn't. Most of the jokes are kind of very timely and boring. They're not as funny. I really only laughed at the Peter Sellers thing. I didn't even laugh that much. I like some of the songs, but this just didn't have the energy you expect from a road movie, and was ultimately very disappointing. And I think it shows sometimes there's certain series is like, why didn't they keep making those? And I think this one, I'm sure the public was feeling like, oh, I know why they stopped making those, because I saw Road to Hong Kong, and it just honestly wasn't very good. And it's a sad note, especially since I'm reviewing all these and I watched them all, and I wanted to watch these movies because my grandparents, that's why this box set's been here this whole time, if you hadn't noticed, because my grandparents both died within a month of each other in the past year. I wanted to do something as kind of like a tribute, because they'd given me their VHS and DVD collection. I wanted to do some reviews with it and do something different, and I thought the road movies were perfect for that. I'm not trying to blame the Road to Hong Kong on the death of my grandparents, but it certainly brought down this whole thing, because before I was like, oh my god, I can't believe these movies are still funny, they're still vibrant, they're still amazing, they still have a great energy to it. And the Road to Hong Kong is kind of showing you why kind of people felt that way about kind of more straight society in the 60s, and why it had to break down, and why the 70s happened. Seeing like kind of the old kind of Hollywood system and how kind of stagnant it had become, and Road to Hong Kong seems like more of an example of that they just felt like, oh, we can make this and it'll be fine, it'll be a big movie and everyone will love it. In a certain regard, they were right, but to me, thinking about this in 1962, that it didn't really fall to pieces until 1967 made me go, holy fuck, the 60s must have stunk when you saw all these like older movie stars who were kept making the kind of expected stuff. It really wasn't a lot of fun to watch. I love classic Hollywood and classic Hollywood stars, but not when they make stuff as boring as this. This just feels expected and unliberating in a way. Before, it represented kind of a new way of breaking the fourth wall, of doing something different. Now it represents something stale and represents something that people want to break out from, instead of being the breakout itself. And that's a sad thing to see this series go down, and it's a sad thing to end my own personal series on, but unfortunately that's how the road movies work. I can't say I'll ever really like this movie and ever really want to watch it again, and frankly you shouldn't either, because really it's a bad note to end this really great comedy series on. So if you have seen The Road to Hong Kong and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And check out my road movies review playlist. I actually have now reviewed all of the road movies, so if you'd like to check out any of my reviews of all 7 of the road movies, click on the annotation below. Thank you very much if you've watched this whole series. I really appreciate it. I like to do a classic Hollywood series. I'm going to do a shorter one before I do my next one, which will be a lot longer, but I'll get into that later in an update video or something. I don't know. I'll tell you. You'll know soon. I will be doing Road to El Dorado and Ishtar as kind of films that are related to this kind of series, but as for actual road movies, I've finished the series. I will be doing those 2 before I start the new series. But seriously, thank you all for watching and experiencing these reviews, and I'm really glad I got to do this, and I wanted to do something with that film collection, and I'm glad that this was the result of it and I got to finish it. And I feel like kind of the better for it, laughing at Bob Hope and listening to Bing Crosby songs and looking at the great chemistry and beauty of Dorothy Lamour has really been a great thrill. And if you watched all of these, thank you very much. I really very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time.